This is episode 59 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. You are in for a real treat today. I think that all women, if we are completely honest with ourselves, to some degree and at different times and in different ways, struggle with body image, with eating, and with food. My guest today is Dr. Anita Johnston. She's a leading expert in the area of women's issues and disordered eating. But what is unique, innovative, and beautiful about Dr. Johnston's approach is her masterful use of storytelling and metaphor in understanding and healing from disordered eating, which she shares in her best-selling book, Eating in the Light of the Moon, a book that I feel every woman and young girl should read. And I also want to mention that in previous episodes, we have discussed metaphor and disordered eating. In episode 9, Jody Gale spoke about disordered eating as a search for wholeness. And in episode 30, Dr. Kim Hermanson spoke about the transformative power of metaphor to unlock creativity and inspire breakthroughs. In today's episode, Dr. Johnston is going to talk about the causes of disordered eating and the power of metaphor in understanding and healing from disordered eating, pulling in research from Neuroscience. She will also speak about the symbolism of the moon in understanding both disordered eating and the feminine principle. Dr. Anita Johnston is a depth psychologist and author of Eating in the Light of the Moon, which has been published in 6 languages. She's the co-creator of the online course Light of the Moon Cafe, which is an interactive workbook and women's support circle for eating in the light of the moon. She has been working in the field of women's issues and disordered eating for over 35 years and is currently the clinical director of Pono&nbsp, Hawaii, which has a residential treatment program in Maui and outpatient eating disorder programs in Honolulu and the Big Island of Hawaii. Dr. Johnston provides individual consultations online and conducts soul hunger workshops and professional trainings around the world using metaphor and storytelling, along with her training as a clinical psychologist to address the complex issues that underlie struggles with eating, weight, and body image. Hi, Dr. Johnston, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, happy to be here.
I am very honored that you are here and grateful for this opportunity. Your book, Eating in the Light of the Moon, is a life-changing book, and it is one of the few books that I have picked up, and it was just so powerful, chapter after chapter, that just spoke right to my heart. And so thank you so much for writing this beautiful book.
That's so kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, it just really captured every chapter I would turn like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And here's another one, just page after page. And I really loved the integration of the metaphor and story to really feel, like to feel it bodily, what you were describing.
Wow. Well, thank you. It was quite a journey writing it. I've never considered myself a writer, and the book wrote me.
Wow.
So it just came forth, and it was a bit of a surprise for me, actually.
Can you share a little bit more about, what drew you into this work, and perhaps that this is what drew you into writing this book?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in women's issues. I'm originally from Guam, and the family I grew up in was pretty matriarchal. And so women's issues and women's cultural issues have always been fascinating to me. But it wasn't until I was working as a psychologist in Hawaii, and I was supervising a young graduate student who was doing her doctoral dissertation on the incidence of eating disorders in Hawaii, that I found myself fascinated by what was going on with women and girls and eating and weight and body image difficulties. So it was through working with her, and there was another woman we would meet every week just to discuss what was happening in Hawaii. And after we continued to meet, we discovered, wow, there's really a problem here. There should be a center for this. And after about the fifth time, we looked at each other and went, well, I guess we're it. So this was in the early 80s. So back then, bulimia had just been a diagnosis, just become a diagnosis. And there certainly wasn't, any understanding about binge eating, and anorexia was thought to be just something that, young white girls got involved in. And that's not what we were seeing at all. And so it was sort of like you created and they come. And they came, women and girls from, and no guys were showing up back then, but women and girls from all ethnicities, all ages, all sizes, all walks of life, all struggling with eating and food issues. And so I was fascinated by that and was curious as to, first of all, why was it girls and women? Second of all, why was it these particular girls and women? And third, why was the struggle around food and eating and weight? And so I just became very, very curious about this. And because I'm a storyteller, I wanted to listen to their stories. And of course, as a psychologist, I'm a trained story listener. So I just listened to their stories as carefully as I could to see if I could discover what was the common denominator, what was the common thread that ran through all of their stories. Want to know what I discovered?
Absolutely.
What I discovered is that they were like the child in the fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. And what I mean by this is they were very sensitive, and they could read between the lines. They could see the bigger picture. They could perceive hypocrisy. They could sense when things were not okay, even if everyone around them said things were perfectly fine. But unlike in the fairy tale where the child, eventually says in a very loud voice, but Mommy, the emperor has no clothes on at all, and everyone saw the emperor for the fool that he was, their lives weren't fairy tales. And so what happened is when they spoke their truth, and I'm talking about as young as maybe 4 years old, saying things like, but Mommy, if Daddy loves us, how come he never comes home, or some such thing? What happened is that they were either ignored, or maybe they were rejected, or ridiculed, or even in some cases abused. And so what happened is they had to find their way to dim their light, to diminish this capacity to perceive subtle realities, because what every child wants, well, what all of us want is a sense of belonging, but they confused it with fitting in. And the difference between belonging and fitting in is when you have a sense of belonging, you stay connected to true self. Whereas with fitting in, you abandon who you are in order to look like and act like and think like and feel like and be like how you think others want you to think and act and look and feel. And so there was this disconnect, and then the food and weight issues played a role in keeping them disconnected in the sense that they felt like something was wrong with them. And then they discovered that they had a problem with eating or food, or so they thought. And so they would restrict their food, and then they would have even greater struggle. And so at least, they had an idea in their mind of, oh, something's wrong with me and I know what it is. I'm too fat. But unfortunately, then that became the red herring and the distracting element. So with the red herring, it's like in a whodunit mystery, like who killed the old lady? Is it the maid, the butler, the chauffeur? And everybody's watching the maid because she's acting kind of strange. But at the end of the story, there's a twist, and it turns out it was the butler who nobody suspected because everybody had their eyes on the maid. So the maid is the red herring. So what happens is the food, the eating, the fat, that becomes the distracting element, and the real issues that the person is struggling with that are a large result of their sensitivity and not knowing how to respond to it, maybe a love-hate relationship with their mother, or maybe their boyfriend ditched them, or they don't know how to make friends, or they're on a career path that doesn't serve them. Those issues fade into the background, and then they get locked into the struggle with eating and weight and food. And so I just became fascinated by it. And I loved working with these girls and women because they were so extraordinary. And to this day, 35 years later, I believe, and I believe this with every fiber of my being, they're the folks the world is waiting for. And these individuals, when they go through the struggle and they come out the other end, what they have to bring to the world is extraordinary, because they're typically highly sensitive beings. They feel things deeply. What might be no big deal to somebody else penetrates their very bones. And initially, they think there's something wrong with them. And unfortunately, in our culture, there's a lot of people that are happy to jump on that bandwagon and say, oh, yeah, you're too sensitive. You're overreacting. What's wrong with you? But the truth of the matter is that it's their sensitivity that's an incredible, incredible gift. And it's the gift that they are born with. You're born that way. You can't change it, and when you can change the color of your eyes. But it's also the gift I believe they've come to bring to the world once they learn how to work with it and embrace it. But the problem is we live in a culture that doesn't support that thinks, it should be water off a duck's back, no big deal. Don't let that get to you. Just control yourself. And so here you have thin-skinned individuals born into a world that values being thick-skinned, and there's nobody to teach them how to work with their thin-skinned nature, how to navigate through this thick-skinned world. And so one of the functions that the struggle with eating and food and weight serves is it distracts them from their feelings that sometimes can feel too intense because they haven't yet developed the skill set. And it's a skill set, anybody can learn it for, dealing with their nature. So that's how I got into the work, and that's why I continue to do it. I just love it.
I feel that when I first picked up your book, one of the things that drew me in was the image of the moon and the title. The title is so beautiful. And I have to share with you that as I spoke with other colleagues as I prepared for our conversation, and some had not heard of the book, and I shared it with them, they were immediately drawn in to the title and the imagery of the moon. And so I was hoping that, you could share with our listeners, because, not everyone is familiar with the meaning of the moon and the symbolism. What's the significance of the moon? Because you use this throughout the book,
Yes, and I use it with my online courses, and the moon is really important to me. It's interesting because years ago, and I wrote this book, 25 years ago, and I remember my agents wanting me to call it Eating as a Metaphor, and I'm going, oh my God, that's just the ugliest title. And I thought, oh, no, I can't have that title. And so I was on an airplane on the way back from a trip to Guam visiting my family, and I just had a piece of paper out and just started scribbling and writing, and it came to me, Eating in the Light of the Moon, because essentially what I work with very strongly, and it's a big part of the work I do, is the feminine principle. And so, of course, in many cultures and traditions, the moon is the symbol for the feminine, and the feminine as it exists in men, women, whatever gender you identify with. And so this idea that that's the part of ourselves that is emotional, instinctual, intuitive, and relational. And so the moon is the perfect symbol for all of that. It's like this idea that everything is connected, the moon and the tides and the fluidity of our emotions. And so that's how I came up with that. And then I struggled Was it going to be eating in the light of the moon, by the light of the moon, under the light of the moon? We have to do the prepositions. And then I realized, no, because it needed to, and a lot of people say it's by the light of the moon, but it's really not, because it's in the light. It's fully embraced by that light, the light that's in you and you in the light. And so it's not under, it's not by. And in a way, that really enhances the metaphoric language that I use. And it's the metaphoric language is what I find is transformative and freeing for people who are caught up in this kind of a struggle. And so, for example, when Romeo says, Juliet is my son, now, right there, you, at a very deep level, you can get the connection, but it's not spelled out. It's not, if you try to figure that out and say, okay, you made a list of all the qualities of the sun and all the qualities of Juliet, it's not going to give you the message because he's saying, basically, like the sun, she lights up my life. So much is contained in so few words that has access to a deeper part of the psyche. And so that's why I use the moon as the symbol and as the metaphor when I'm trying to help people get to that aspect of themselves. They're emotional, they're instinctual, they're intuitive, they're relational aspects that unfortunately have been, because of our culture, they're a little bit cockeyed.
Yeah.
So in our culture, the logical, linear, goal achievement oriented side of ourselves, that's the yang masculine side, is valued over the feminine. And so what I discovered with these girls and women that were struggling is, like almost all of us in the culture, they internalize this imbalance. And that their freedom came when they were able to embrace their feminine and get back into balance.
And so the title, Eating in the Light of the Moon,
yes, that
indicates, or, it reflects back that there's a connection in this light, and the light is bathing you.
Yes. And it's a different kind of light. Mm-hmm. What I discovered when I first started working with eating disorders, you can't just go head on. You can't even use logic to say, well, you're not too fat, or, that's not enough food. I mean, it doesn't work. It's too harsh. It's too, and so the light of the moon is a very different kind of light. It's soft and it's changing. And so, for example, I have in this series of online courses I do at the Light of the Moon Cafe, there's 3 different modules. And the first module is the new crescent moon. And the idea is introducing people to this idea that there's another way to look at your struggle, as opposed to thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me. And so then I use the second module is under the light of the full moon. So now you're ready. Now you're ready to really shine more light on it, but it's still not that intense light of the sun, where it's still soft and gentle and reflective. And then the third module is the beauty of the unseen moon. And here we go to those, those hidden places, those dark places, so sometimes scary places. But if someone's wanting to clear whatever their struggle happens to be with eating, you have to go deep. You have to go subterranean. It's sort of like a weed. If you cut it off at the top, given the right circumstances, it's going to come right back. But if you can go down and find the roots, you have to go into the dark. So it's almost like I just speak that way. I live by those images. They carry great meaning for me.
Well, it's as if the images are the map. If you just follow, if you follow the metaphor, it'll lead you. It will lead you through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it'll go all the way right into your body.
Yeah.
It becomes a physical, embodied experience.
And I think when you consider some of the more, I guess, traditional or clinical or masculine principled approaches to disordered eating, you can also see why they don't work. If you're counting calories, if you're weighing yourself, if you are saying, I need to have this many grams of protein, because that's very mechanical. It's not intuitive. Right. And so I love that how this ties all together with this beautiful metaphor of, even the going deep, because when you're counting calories and weighing yourself and portioning your meals, that's not going deep. That's all surface stuff.
Exactly. It's external. It's using external measures for your guidance system. And so part of the problem with that is that I believe the answers are inside, but you have to learn how to access them and get to them. And so when ultimately, where someone is headed is getting the divine marriage, getting the two to work in concert together. But, and I would say to my clients, it's sort of like, if all you have is this achieving and accomplishing, it's sort of like having a ladder that you climb all the way up to the top and you go, oh, oops, wrong wall, right?
Yeah.
You're not tuning in for that guidance as to if this is right for you or if this is what you really want. And what I really, really love about this work is that when someone initially, they may come to me because their struggle is with eating and food, but once they get this, this gets applied to the whole rest of their life. It's really transformative, not just around, long after the eating difficulties are gone, and they do go. You can totally, completely free yourself. And long after they're gone, they have a mechanism for maneuvering through life. So I think of the feminine as the vessel to hold your deepest truth. But the masculine is the vehicle which takes it out into the world. And so we spend a whole week under the light of the full moon working on creating a new inner mother, where you can get the soothing and comfort that comes with mothering, mother as a verb, mother as an archetype, that has the energy that's available to them at any time. You don't have to depend on your biological mother, especially if she's no longer available or is not capable. And not only that, though, is this idea that the struggle with food, what I started to see, and this came out of doing some work with Marion Woodman, the Jungian analyst, and she talked about food being the concrete symbol for mother. And when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, it's really mothering as a verb. And so this idea that you get to create your own inner mother once you do that, once you understand exactly what that frequency feels like of nurture and comfort and soothing, then you discover, you sort of create an antenna so that you can seek out and be attracted to and attract to you mothering. And you can get that from your husband. You can get that from your dog. You can get that from the neighbor next door, providing you understand it. You can get it from Mother Nature, if you understand its archetypal energy. But with eating difficulties, what happens is you get the concretization of that. And so food is the physical, concrete symbol of mothering, which is no surprise, since if you figure, for most of us, our first experience of being in distress on this planet as an infant, we're given the breast or the bottle. So you can see how that really does get linked in. But when it becomes concretized, then your experience becomes limiting and it becomes addictive, because no amount of food will ever be able to provide all the mothering that we desire. So, the idea that food is the concrete physical symbol of mothering, not mothering itself. It's just like, you can have 1,000 American flags. Are you more free? It's like, well, no, because we know it's the symbol of freedom. And so just helping people, and frankly, what I found is that these folks who struggle, they're really gifted at this. They can really get the symbolism and the metaphor. They can get that language, and then they can start to see how it's getting played out unconsciously in their lives. And then once they bring it into the light of consciousness, then they have some choice.
Well, I think that, when you use these images and these metaphors, you begin to use another part of your brain, and and you're starting to reconnect with the intuition that has been put aside. And when you begin to take in this metaphor and to pay attention to the images, you are utilizing the feminine principle. And so it's, you know, as you said, the concretization of food really makes it that red herring. And everyone thinks it's about the food, and it's really not.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, I mean, what I really love about this, because I've been doing this forever, but now neuroscience can actually see what's going on in the brain when somebody gets the metaphor. So when they're able to crack the hunger code, and what happens is the anterior superior temporal gyrus, which is in a fold in your brain right above your right ear, it shoots out a burst of gamma waves, which is the highest electrical frequency in the brain, and creates new neural pathways because they're getting the connections. And so for me, that's like really exciting. It's like, so yeah, once you start to use that side of your brain that can see the forest, not just the trees, and see how they're all connected, it's really pretty cool.
So I think that's what was happening to me when I first read your book. I was having gamma wave explosions in my brain.
That's fun. I just love that.
You know, one of the stories there were so many. Starting with the very first one, with the marsh and the bog, that moon story.
The buried moon.
I love that one. But anyway, I loved when you shared the story of the log in the river, because I felt like this was a really great story that describes the experience of disordered eating. So I was wondering if you could share the story and kind of expound on that a little bit more.
Yes, I'd be happy to. It's my favorite metaphor because it's everybody else's favorite metaphor.
It's a great metaphor.
Emails from people around the world saying this shifted it. And so I've since, I remember the time I was just sitting across from a woman trying to explain some things to her, and she wasn't getting it. So I just launched into this. I've dissected it so many times and looked at it through what Jung says, how Jung says that the metaphor affects the psyche on 3 different levels: the mental, the emotional, and the imaginative. And it's in the imaginative realm that the transforming power occurs, is according to him. But most interesting to me is that when you're using a metaphor like this, it affects the psyche on all those 3 levels simultaneously. Wow. And according to Jung, this is why a deep connection and an immediate connection can be made. And in this day and age where, you have managed care and all of that, the sooner you can get somebody to understand something and then make the shift, the better, right?
Right, yeah.
So here's the log story. Imagine, so you see we begin with imagination. Imagine you're on the banks of a raging river. It's pouring down rain, and you slip and you fall in, and you're drowning. You're getting pulled down through the rapids. And along comes a big log, and you grab on. And the log saves your life. It keeps your head above water when surely you would have drowned. And eventually, it carries you to a place in the river where the water is calm. And from there, you can see the riverbanks. But you can't get there because you're holding on to the log. So now the very thing that just saved your life is getting in the way of you getting where you want to go in life. And so when I think of disordered eating, I think of that as the log, that to make no mistake about it, has served a function, a very important function, and it would behoove you to find out what that function is, because somehow it kept you from drowning in some very turbulent emotional waters. Now, though, to make it more complicated, there's always somebody at the riverbank yelling, "Let go of the log, let go of the log." And you feel like an absolute idiot because you can't let go of the log. Now, the way I see it is letting go of the log may not be the very best thing to do. Even if that person is the person who loves you more than life itself, or even if they're the top expert in the world, there's a wise part of ourselves that will not let us let go of something until we're good and ready. Because what would happen if you let go of the log, started to swim to shore, got halfway there and realized, oh shoot, I don't have the strength to make it? Well, that means you don't have the strength to make it back to the log either, and you're really sunk. So what do you do instead? Well, you let go of the log and you try floating. And when you start to sink, you grab back on. Then you let go of the log and you practice treading water. And when you get tired, you grab back on. And then you let go of the log and you swim around it once, grab back on, twice, grab back on, 10 times, grab back on, 100 times, 200 times, whatever it takes to have the strength and confidence to make it to shore. Then you let go of the log. So a lot of things are introduced in this metaphor. First, the idea that there is a function. You're not doing whatever you're doing with food because you're stupid or broken or damaged goods, that it is serving you in some way, and it's worth finding that out. Then two, introducing the idea that of your own inner guidance. And three, that there's a skill set that one needs in order to not be doing whatever it is they're doing with food. And so all that gets rolled up into one metaphor, and then we can work with it from there.
Yes, that's so powerful. And I remember reading in the book that you wrote that recovery from disordered eating begins with the understanding that the disordered eating behavior served you when your goal was survival. And that's so powerful because I feel like there's so much shame around disordered eating.
So much
shame. And this really helps the individual shift into a different relationship with this part of themselves that they have had for so long.
Right.
And then that self-acceptance.
Right.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and it helps to evoke curiosity.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I think is really important in the recovery process, because it's like it's hard to just stop judging yourself. And it's sort of like you don't walk into a dark room and push the dark out. You turn on a light. And so to bring in as much curiosity as you can, then that becomes the antidote to the self-judgment. Because when there's a self-judgment and judgment, that gets absorbed from others and all of that shame, there's not a whole lot of healing energy to work with. And so evoking curiosity in that regard is really important.
So I want to share another quote that stood out for me. And you wrote, "As long as we interpret our non-physical hunger literally, we will attempt to use food to satisfy it, and you will remain hungry forever. But when we define our hungers and develop a deeper awareness of what we are hungry for, we can begin to seek the appropriate nourishment." So could you please speak on that?
Well, I teach people how to do that essentially, and again, using metaphor. So basically, it's understanding that there's different kinds of hunger that require different kinds of food. And so again, imagine, always go back to imagination, right? Imagine two tanks, tank A and tank B. Now, tank A is the tank you fill when you need physical nourishment and you fill it with food. Tank B is the tank you fill when you need emotional or spiritual nourishment, and you fill it with things like attention, affection, appreciation, acknowledgement, meditation, prayer, and so on. But what happens for many of us is we get confused and we think there's just one tank. So before we know it, tank A is full and overflowing, but we're still hungry. Or we don't even want to get close to tank A because it seems like the bottomless pit. So what has to happen is you have to tease the two tanks apart. And the way you do this is with proprioceptive or interoceptive awareness, which really is basically body awareness and understanding what the physical sensations are in your body of hunger and satiety. And so I might ask someone, okay, what's the physical hunger you experience in your body when you are hungry, and where in your body do you feel it? And they might say something like, oh, I get lightheaded and dizzy. Not. That's not hunger. That's famished, right? And what's going to happen if you wait to eat until you're famished is you're going to eat everything you can get your hands on, you, me, and the rest of us, right? We're designed that way. The physical sensation of hunger is a whisper, not a shout. And so I help people start to find that sensation, and as a physical sensation, like a contraction or an expansion, a heaviness, a lightness, a roughness or a smoothness, a hollowness, a density. You get the idea. It's something physical. I feel like pizza is not a physical sensation, right? You're going in, looking to the body. And the same for the sensation of fullness. If I ask someone, what's the physical sensation of fullness and where in your body is it located? Typically, someone will say, oh, I have to unbuckle my belt, or it's hard to breathe. No, that's stuffed. And what's going to happen if you eat on a regular basis until you're stuffed is you're going to have a body size that's not the right size for you. So again, the sensation of fullness, it's a whisper, not a shout, and it's a subtle contraction or expansion or heaviness or lightness or roughness or smoothness or hollowness or density. And so what I often do is to help people tease the two tanks apart, you first have to be able to rule out tank A. And so I suggest that they do this experiment of taking 2 bites at a time, asking themselves if they're hungry. If the answer is yes, to tune in and say, okay, how do I know I'm hungry? What's the physical sensation and where in my body is it? And keep going 2 bites at a time until when they ask themselves, am I still hungry? The answer is no. And then they say, okay, how do I know I'm not hungry? And look inside for a physical sensation. Now, this can take a while because for many of us, those signals have a lot of static on the line. They've been scrambled because we've been taught to eat for all kinds of reasons other than physical hunger, because you want to be a member of the Clean Plate Club, or somebody who prepared the food loves you very much, or everybody else is eating, or you deserve a break, or all kinds of reasons. So it takes some time to untangle these two tanks. But the idea being that you need to sort out the different kinds of hungers that you experience. So typically what can happen is somebody gets a handle on, okay, I think I found my hunger and satiety signals, and it's different for different people. I remember one woman, she came in to session and she was waving like a half a candy bar in the air, and she's, look at this. And I went, wow, what's that? And she goes, well, it's a half a candy bar. I was eating it and I felt my fullness signal. And so I wrapped it up and put it back in my purse to eat again when I was hungry. Another woman, she said, I found it. And I went, you found what? So this is weeks, can go, long before, and I don't remember the assignment. And she said, I found my hunger signal. It's a little tickle and it's right here.
Wow.
And a woman I worked with, she had struggled with bulimia, and she was a top model. She flew all over Tokyo, Japan and Europe, and it took her a long time to find her fullness sensation. And she came in one day, she goes, well, I found it. I know what it is. I said, well, what is it? And she pointed to her, sort of like her midsection, and she said, it's the sensation of one cylinder sliding into another until there's a thunk. So it was metaphoric, and yet it was physical. She could feel that.
Wow.
So then what happens is, so let's say you found your hunger and fullness signals, and you're reaching for the pizza, and you check in, not a hunger signal in sight, but you still want to eat that pizza. Well, guess what? You've just tumbled down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole and landed smack dab in tank B. In tank B, pizza is not pizza. Food is not food. What is it? It's a concrete symbol of another kind of hunger that you're experiencing and may not even know about. So tank B is the world of metaphor. And so the first question to ask yourself when you discover, well, I want to eat that pizza, and yet there's no hunger signal, is you would ask yourself, what is the feeling I'm trying not to feel? Because you see, we don't eat for emotional reasons. We eat because we don't want to feel our emotions. We want to distract ourselves from our emotions. We want to stuff our feelings. But typically, and I have to say, when you ask, what's the feeling I'm trying not to feel? And you may do a scan of your day to see if you're ticked off at the jerk on the freeway, or that cut you off, or maybe you're worried about an upcoming parent-teacher conference, or maybe you're annoyed at something your boss said, or you're frustrated with your husband or whatever. You do a scan to see, could there possibly be a feeling I'm trying not to feel? But more often than not, I'm here to tell you that the answer will be, I don't know. I feel fine. Everything's okay, right? Because, as Carl Jung said, the unconscious really is unconscious, right? It's out of your awareness.
Yeah.
So the good news is the food will reveal it to you. The food itself. And it's speaking to you, but it's speaking to you in code. And you have to crack the code. And this is where metaphor comes in. And I'll give you and your listeners a basic outline of this, of how to crack the code. Don't have to worry about like writing this down, because if anybody wants it all written down, all they have to do is go to lightofthemooncafe.com/WID, which stands for Women in Depth. And you can get a PDF. I'll send you a PDF of this. So, but here's how you crack the code. It goes something like this. Sweet foods usually have to do with either feeling like you're not sweet enough, or there's not enough sweetness in your life. So if you're craving those foods, when you're not hungry. Crunchy, salty foods typically are connected to unexpressed anger and frustration. Warm foods are usually associated with a longing for emotional warmth. Spicy foods are typically connected to a desire, or if you don't want that food, it's a restriction of excitement, stimulation, and change. And chocolate, we know this from Valentine's, right? Sex and romance and sensuality.
Yes, and dark chocolate's good for you.
Yeah. Well, it's all good for you. But the idea is you want to make sure you know which hungers you are feeding, because no amount of food will ever fill tank B. So that's why it's important to be able to crack the code so that you can get the satisfaction and the fulfillment that you're hungry for. So, for example, I had this one client, and she struggled with bulimia. And I said to her one day, I said, if there were one food that you wished you could eat and have no consequences that you have to deal with, none whatsoever, what would that food be? And she said, well, that's easy. Vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top. And I said, okay, I want you to imagine I've never had vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top, and you're going to tell me what's so wonderful about it. And she said, well, it's sweet, it's smooth, and it's refreshing. Well, when we took a good look at what was going on in her life, her boyfriend was accusing her of not being sweet enough. She'd hit a really rough patch with her parents that she was desperately wanting to smooth out. And she was in a dead-end job in need of a refreshing change. There we go, with one food and 6 months of therapy, right? and sometimes it's in the language of the foods. I had a woman I was working with, and she was an emergency room physician. And she came in and she was so upset with herself and beating herself up. She says, oh my God, I can't believe what I did. It's so disgusting. I said, wow, what did you do? And she said, well, I came home from work and I fixed a bunch of chicken tenders for myself and my husband, and I ate them all before he even got home. I can't even believe what I did. I'm so disgusting. And she kind of went into that. I went, whoa, let's backtrack. So tell me what it was that you were doing. You just come off a 14-hour shift in the emergency room, tending to all kinds of emotional and physical trauma? She said, yeah. And I said, so what do you think you were really hungry for? And we'd worked together for some time. And she said, a hug. I said, yeah, you wanted some TLC, some tender, loving care. And instead you ate the chicken tenders.
Wow.
Now, when the metaphor is on target, when it pops, when that anterior superior temporal gyrus shoots that gamma waves, what happens is it's like it pops into consciousness. And now she'll never be able to eat chicken tenders again when she is not hungry. This is the cue. When you're hungry, chicken tenders are just chicken tenders. But when she's not hungry, she'll never be able to do that without looking to see if she's not wanting also some tender, loving care. So that's kind of how it works. And it gets to be fun. Most people who are struggling with eating, when they discover, wow, this is a path to consciousness, it's really cool. I had one woman this one was recently, I was doing a soul hunger workshop that her daughter had come to. And she contacted later and she said, look, I have an eating disorder and I'm wondering if you would work with me. I said, sure. And we can do a phone consult. And she said, well, here's the deal. I've been in recovery for 27 years from alcohol. I've not had a drop of liquor in 27 years. But I have this eating disorder. I said, well, tell me, what's the nature of it? And she said, well, I binge on candy. And I'm so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed that I hide little pockets of candy all over my office so that people can't see how much I'm really eating. And I said, well, what kind of candy? And she said a kind of candy I didn't recognize. So I said, well, what kind of candy is that? And she said, it's licorice. And I went, oh my gosh, wow. You may not be drinking liquor any longer, but licorice. And again, it popped it in that we were able to see that the issue that had been driving her alcohol addiction with liquor had never fully been resolved. And so it was getting played out with liquor-ish, not quite liquor.
Wow, this is so amazing.
It really does get to be, once you kind of start speaking that metaphoric language, so much gets revealed. It's really exciting. You can see why I love the work. It's really fun.
And, I love working also, with shadow and metaphor. And you can see how the metaphor really dips into the unconscious and just brings it up. It's just right there.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's tucked in the language.
Yeah.
I have another client, she was in London and we were doing this Skype session and she would always come like rushing in, her hair flying, she was always late, or I'd get a text saying, I'm on the train, I'm almost there. And she worked for a startup company, and she came in when we were having a session. She said, oh my gosh, I binged and I'm really upset. And I said, oh, when did you binge? And she said, last night. And I said, oh, what was happening? And I said, what do you binge on? She said, well, sweet stuff. And I hate to say this, it's so embarrassing, but ketchup. I put ketchup on everything. And I said, really? And she said, yeah. So I said, so what was happening yesterday before you binged? And she said, well, I worked for this startup company and we had a deadline to make. And if we didn't make it, the company was going to fold. They were doing a crowdfunding. And so I said, well, did you make your deadline? And she said, yes. I said, did you know it before you binged? And she said, no. And I said, so then were you able to celebrate? She goes, no, our boss said we just had to start working on the next thing. And I went, oh my gosh. I said, so you're always trying to catch up.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's just, oh wow.
She now lives in Brazil and she sent me an email. She says, guess what? I don't do the catch up thing anymore. So it's cool. Yeah, it's consciousness is really what it is.
So Dr. Johnston, I wanted to ask another question in line with this, because we're talking about cracking the code by looking to the food and what the metaphor of the food. How does this work when maybe someone's not eating?
It's the same thing. So what I found, first of all, I don't even believe in eating disorders any longer. It sounds a little like blasphemy, but what I've discovered is that if someone is restricting their food, that's not the only thing they're restricting in their life. They're restricting new experiences, and they're restricting their emotions, and they're restricting their sexuality. And there's restriction everywhere. It's this pattern that has become a way of coping, and the food just, often is the most dangerous, and so it gets your attention. If someone is binging and purging, you can see so many areas in their life where they take in more than they can assimilate or digest, whether it's they meet somebody and they fall madly in love and 2 weeks later they can't stand them. Or somebody becomes their very, very best friend and they find something out and they go, oh, I want nothing to do with that person. Or they take on a ton of classes and then they drop out of school. Or they start a million projects and then just, can't get any of them done. You see the binge purge process everywhere. Mm. And when someone is struggling with binging, you're going to find the theme of scarcity everywhere in their life. It's not just that there's never enough food, but there's never enough coffee. There's never enough time. There's never enough attention. There's just never enough. And so when someone is restricting the food, basically it points you towards the area in their life that they're restricting. So, for example, I remember I was doing a group, and this young woman, she was struggling with anorexia, and her horror food was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And when we explored it, she felt like she was sandwiched between two parents, one who was cloyingly sweet and the other who was sticky and controlling.
Wow.
And she was able to see, what was being communicated through her aversion. Now, of course, initially someone will say, well, it's because it's got too many calories or it's fattening. It's like, I don't even go there because that's the red herring. I'm not interested in that. It doesn't take you anywhere. That's like a dead end. I want to know about the qualities of the food, and I listen as carefully as I can to see where the inflection is, where the emphasis is, where it's embellished in some way because there's energy there. And so I track that.
So really a big piece of this is for either the therapist or clinician who's working with this individual or the individual to really begin to listen to their languaging, to the story they tell.
Right. To know that it's not nonsense, that there's deep meaning to it. And I think I got on this track years ago when I was a brand new graduate student, and I walked into a class, and this little old man in front of the class was speaking with a really thick accent. But I said, come on, Anita, he's speaking English, focus, you'll understand. And that man was Viktor Frankl.
Wow.
Who wrote Man's Search for Meaning,
right.
as for your listeners, if they don't know, out of his experiences in the Nazi prison camp. And basically what he discovered is that, you can be stripped of everything, but the one thing that cannot be taken from you is the meaning you give to your experience. And that meaning makes all the difference in the world. And so I think he sort of set me on this course of really looking for the meaning in areas that appear to be meaningless. And so whenever someone, says, well, yeah, this is just stupid. It's like, or the word just, that'll get me hunting, right?
Right.
We're going for the shadows now, right?
Yeah.
That which has been disowned by it's just this, or I just can't stop, or whatever. And it's like, okay, now we go in.
Yeah. Wow. This has just been such a inspiring conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm so excited to share our conversation with the world. And thank you so much for sharing your deep, deep wisdom. And I know so many women will resonate with this, because whether you have what people would term disordered eating or not, I really feel that women, to some degree, if they're really being honest, struggle with food.
Yeah, I call it eating difficulties because, it's like it's a whole range, and it comes and goes in our lives, but it's present for all of us. And so eating disorder, it could be a full-blown eating disorder, but that doesn't even matter. It's a difficulty, a challenge.
Because almost if by labeling or naming it or diagnosing it, it's another red herring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Dr. Johnston, can you share the best way for listeners to learn more about your work, to get in touch with you? And can you also share what your many offerings are that listeners can perhaps look into if they'd like to work with you?
Well, a couple places. I have a website, lightofthemooncafe.com. And that's where you can get that food and metaphors decoding. And if you sign up, I do a weekly vlog of metaphors. So wherever I send those out, so you could sign up for that. Or you can reach me directly at Anita at lightofthemooncafe.com. Or they can contact me through my personal website, which is dranitajohnston.com. That's DRANITAJOHNSTON.com. And I'm happy to respond. And I like I say, this work is my passion. I love it. And I'd be happy to connect with your listeners. And I have the Light of the Moon Cafe, which is an online interactive women's circle. And it's based on eating in the light of the moon, although now I had to write a few more chapters to include. But it's what it is it's an 8-week course where every day you get something, whether it's an audio or a video. I've put my stories to world music. And so there's or a metaphor, or downloadable PDF activities, drawing, writing activities. And then there's a forum. So like right now at the cafe, we have women from all over the world. Right now, I think Australia and Germany and across the US. And let's see, there's someone from Dublin and a couple people from Canada. So in the forum, people support each other. It's only women. And I didn't think it'd be able to create a women's circle online, but it works. And I'm in on the cafe and I respond to all the comments. And so I'm in there. And so every day there's an activity to share and talk about. And it's really a lot of fun. And so that's the Light of the Moon Cafe.
Wow, so many incredible resources. I'm very excited. I'm going to definitely sign up for your vlog so I can hear about more metaphors. And I wanted to thank you also for the PDF of cracking the hunger code for our listeners. And we'll be sure to list all of the resources that you mentioned in the show notes.
Great.
So thank you again, Dr. Johnston. This has been such a gift to spend this time with you.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Lourdes.
Take good care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dr. Johnston. I feel so privileged and honored to have been able to have this conversation with her. There were many, many gems in this episode, but here are a few that stood out for me. That the common denominator in women with disordered eating is high sensitivity. That recovery from disordered eating begins with the understanding that the disordered eating behavior served you when your goal was survival. And that in disordered eating, it's never about the food. And that the healing potential of metaphor is supported by neuroscience, which has shown that when a person connects with a metaphor and it makes sense, it creates gamma waves in the brain, actually changing the brain. Finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, I wanted to mention again that in episode 9, Jody Gale spoke about disordered eating as a search for wholeness, and her episode really dovetails beautifully with what Dr. Johnston shared today. Also in episode 30, Dr. Kim Hermanson spoke about the transformative power of metaphor to unlock creativity and inspire breakthroughs. And if you are interested in metaphors and want to learn more about them, that's a wonderful episode to check out. For show notes to today's episode and links to the resources mentioned, including the free PDF from Dr. Johnston on understanding your food cravings, please visit www.lourdesviato.com/women-in-depth. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.